Today, we're going to take the Dapol 16-ton mineral wagon, pristine in its brand new condition, and we're going to weather it. Welcome back to Newton Grove, and welcome to all my brand new subscribers. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, before we get started in today's video, if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and also give this video a big thumbs up because it does help with ranking and people finding the videos on this channel. If you mention the word weathering to some modelers, you get mixed reactions. Some modelers are really cautious and nervous, and others just take to it like a duck to water. There are some amazing modelers out there that put all of us to shame. I mean, they can just make things look so realistic. But this video is targeted more at those who are getting into weathering who either haven't done it before or who have, but are still a little bit cautious. I mean, a wagon like this, brand new, can cost 50, 60, 70 pounds, depending on where you buy it from. The last thing you want to do is ruin it with bad weathering. So slow and subtle is definitely the way to go in any form. But these days there are so many things that make weathering so much easier. And you can see here on the table, I have a few of them. Over here we have two powders from the excellent, and I really mean excellent, Humbrol weathering powder range. Over here we have the aging powders pack from Humbrol, and that gives you rust and dust and dirt and smoke and all the others, and you can really use those to make a very realistic effect. And that's all used for things like color, shade and everything else. And over here, and this is the magic ingredient, Scenic Rust by Deluxe Materials. This stuff is actual, well, it turns into actual rust. So unlike some of these powders that simulate the color of rust, this one gives you real rust. And as we go through the video, I'm going to show you how this magic works. The other thing we're going to have to use, of course, are some brushes. And I have these general purpose brushes from Humbrol. They should do the trick rather well. And last but not least, we have a reference photograph. Now, using reference photographs is all important. Don't just think, oh yeah, I'll just weather this however I want to, or I can picture how it might look. Always use a reference photograph, because whilst you might think, oh, I'll put a bit here and a bit there, if you use something that is based on real life, you're guaranteed of getting better results. So, we have everything that we need. Let's get into this. Right, to start with, I'm going to be using just these two weathering powders. So I've got Smoke from Humbrol and the Dark Earth. Because when you look at your reference photograph, and we're going to start from the base first, around the wheels, the frame and so forth, that's where all the dirt starts on. Plus the thing is, if we start down there, we can hold onto the body. We're not going to make this dirty just yet. So having a look at our reference photograph, you can see here there's a lot of rust, there's a lot of dirt, especially in this one. This has obviously been quite neglected. It hasn't been through an overhaul anytime soon. It's full of absolute filth. So what we're going to start to do is you basically just dip your brush into your weathering powder and you just make a start. You just put it all over. Now, when you first start this, you might freak out a little bit, but the good thing with these powders is if you only put a little bit on your brush at a time and you just dab it on subtly, you can build it up, and because it's not paint, if you make a mistake, get some water out there, get some water, put it on your brush, take it off, start again. Weathering is a fun process. It's just like painting anything, it takes time. You have to take your time with this. If you rush weathering, you get awful results. And we've all seen some really awful results. So literally just dab it on and enjoy the process. Keep looking at your reference photograph. I'm basically just putting this Dark Earth right now over everything. So I'm putting it over the springs, I'm putting it over the horn blocks, the keep plates, the brake rigging, everything. And it doesn't matter where it goes for now. Just put everything on. Make sure that you get in there as well and do the wheel as well, because the wheels were never clean, they were never black, they were always full of mud and rust and dirt and crap. Can I say crap on this channel? Oh, I just said it then, crap. There you go, get used to it. And very quickly, even though you can't see from this wide shot, we have turned something that looks brand new and pristine on that side to something that's looking a bit more muddy on this side. You can see the difference there between putting the weathering on and the absolute clean and pristine side. Now, I'm not going to show you how I do everything. Basically, you just repeat this process over all 4 sides, underneath as well. So we'll fast forward through this and I'll see you in the next part. Okay, so I've gone around the entire thing. I've also done underneath, and this is how it looks so far. Now, one of the things I want to mention here is I haven't done the complete underside for 2 reasons. Number 1, when it's on the track, you never see the complete underside anyway. And number 2, why waste powders if you're not going to see it? But what is important to do on the underside, make sure you do the back of the wheels, because chances are you will see them, whether you are just looking at it with your eyes or if you take photographs, I guarantee you will see them. And if you do the front of the brake rigging, you have to do behind it as well. So you don't need to do everything underneath, but just make sure that you do enough. And that concludes the first step. So I'm finished now with the dark earth for the moment. I'm going to go around now with some of the smoke over here. Now, it's important. I recommend that you use the smoke weathering powder rather than black, because black is obviously a little bit too black. Smoke, it's a bit more charcoal, a bit more grey. It blends really, really well. So I definitely recommend using that to get those nice sort of subtle effects. To start with, I'm just going to go over what I've already done. Not everywhere though, just in certain parts. So if I look at my reference photograph here, I might put some charcoal or some smoke down here, maybe on parts of the frame, definitely on part of the wheels as well, and probably around the buffers. I'm not going to do everything because it's about layering, it's about mixing things up. So let's get into this. Okay, and there we have our frame, wheels and brake rigging basically done, and you'll see from these close-ups here how these 2 colors have blended together so well. So you can see here how these 2 simple weathering powder textures and colors have worked really, really well to come up with what I would perceive to be a very realistic shade and tone. You can see here you've got the subtleties where the smoke has just toned down that intense dark earth brown color, yet it hasn't turned it completely black. It's still not completely brown. You've got patches of brown, patches of black, and a few where it's just all mixed together, and that's all the way through, from your couplings to the wheels to the brake rigging, the whole lot. That really is easy. It's taken me all of 5 minutes to do that. As you can see, there's been no precision accuracy in it whatsoever. It literally is just adding it on, looking at your photographs and just doing what feels right. If you're using other colors, for example, such as bright rust, that's where you go sparingly. And you can see here on the reference photograph, there are patches of rust around, for example, the springs and so forth, that we will put on later, and you do that very subtly. But for these 2 base colors, because they work so well together, they blend so well together, you can afford to be a little bit less accurate. Splash it on, mix it together, and just see what it looks like. At the end of the day, weathering is all about what makes you think, you know what, I'm happy with that, it looks good. Some people like heavy weathering, some people like subtle weathering, but once again, you look at your reference photograph, in this particular instance, the frame and under, it's pretty heavy weathering, so I'm happy with that. We're now going to bring out these weathering powders and just add a few little highlights and so forth in accordance to this photograph before we move on to the magic stuff. Now, happily, Humbrol, of course, have put the names on top of the packet over here, which is just as well because there's no names on these little canisters as such. So you really need to look at the color and match it up to go, okay, well, this one here is iron oxide, this one here is light rust. You got smoke and black. We're not going to use those 2 because we've got smoke over here. I'll put those aside. So make sure that you look at these because these aren't named, not even on the bottom. That's the only gripe I'm going to have. Humbrol, you could have done something there, but at least we've got this as a guide. Now, if you have a look at our reference photograph over here, you can see how there's some light rust on things like the springs, on the horn guides and under the frame, the brake rigging and so forth, and that's what we're going to replicate over here. So I'm going to start with the light rust color. The problem with the lighter colors is you need to go sparingly, because if you add on too much, it will be so overpowering, you'll have to start again. You'll have to get some water onto your brush or just a wet rag or something like that and wipe it all clean, start again with building up your two base colors with your smoke and your dark earth. So when you're dealing with your lighter colors, go sparingly. So just put the slightest amount onto your brush, because when you put this stuff on, it does have a tendency of staining quite badly. Now some of these granules are rather large. Put a few patches in here. So you can see this is all very subtle. You're just doing the highlights. You don't want to put too much on your brush. We're trying to make this look very, very subtle. You can see over here how that's now just starting to just highlight a little bit, which is exactly what we want. So you can see here, this is very subtle now. Some of the granules are rather big, so of course when you go to tap them off, you can just start to see here, it's building up, it's nice and subtle, it's not overpowering, and that's exactly what you want, because once again, if we look at our reference photograph, you can see there the rust is just nice and subtle on that particular wagon, and that's exactly what we're trying to achieve here as well. There we go. Well, that is now starting to look pretty damn good. I don't think I've blown 60 pounds on this wagon just yet. This is the importance of looking at this photograph. I know I keep saying that, but it really is important. I'm looking at it all the time. You can see here in some of these close-ups, there is subtle highlights over here in the frame. I made it a little bit heavier over here on the sides because the rain actually would get on top of those buffers and make it maybe a little bit more rusty. Once again, the reference photograph shows that. So I'm rather happy with that. So we've gone from a very pristine looking 16-ton mineral wagon to something which is starting to look quite well worked and weather worn. Let's face it, wagons never got cleaned. The only time they ever looked any good was when they were first built and freshly painted, or they went in for overhaul and came out again freshly painted. Wagons like this never, ever were taken care of. The next step in the process now is to add the scenic rust from Deluxe Materials to the body of the wagon. Now you may be saying to yourself, well, you haven't weathered the body of the wagon yet. Why are you putting the scenic rust on before the powders? It's quite simple. I find that if I put the scenic rust on first and then the powders around it, I just get a far better result. That's how I've done it before. That's how I'm going to do it again. It's how it works for me. Now, it may not work for you, but it works for me. And all I can do is show you what I do, and if you like it, then fantastic, give it a go. And if you think that this technique is far-fetched, that's fine, do your own thing, but this is just my way of doing it. So, let's get this scenic rust together. This is now the fun and creative part. This is Scenic Rust by Deluxe Materials, and it's quite simple actually. Over here you have a powder, you have a binder, and you have a developer. You have a small pipette, a small little mixer, and you mix everything into this little cup over here. Now the way that you actually go about this, according to the instructions at least, is that you put some binder onto your surfaces. If you've got flat surfaces, for example, such as on this wagon, you'll need to put some binder on there first, wait until it dries, and then go from there. But if you've got a surface which is a little bit more matte or even satin finish, or it's very lumpy and bumpy, then you probably don't need to use the binder too much. In the past, I actually haven't done it this way because Jonathan doesn't read instructions all the time, but that's how it's meant to be done. So first and foremost is I'm going to apply the binder to the wagon. So being a flat surface, I'm just going to take the binder and I'm just going to paint some of this onto the side of the wagon. Mostly where I'm actually going to put all the rust. So I'll just put this anywhere for now. See, in accordance to our photograph over here, there's obviously going to be a lot around the door, there'll be some around the frame, there'll be a lot around the base over here, so I'll put a lot down here. Obviously I am collecting a little bit of the powder over here, but that's okay. It'll all tone down when we keep weathering. Now you do need to let this dry before you start applying everything else, but at the same time I can't imagine this taking forever to dry either. It's quite thin, so we should be right. I'll leave this for probably about half an hour or so, and then we'll come back to it. Right, now that this binding agent is nice and dry on the wagon, according to the instructions over here, it says to add the rust powder with a soft dry brush. If required, rebuild layers with extra binder and rust powder. So that is the next step. We're going to take our powder and apply it to where we've just put our binder. So all I'm doing here with the powder is I'm actually just brushing it over the entire wagon, because where the binding agent is, that's a little bit sticky. So my thought process is it's going to stick to where the binder is and not stick to where it isn't. That's logical enough in my mind. And you can see here it really is actually sticking as well. It's looking good, and when the developer goes on, this turns into actual rust and it looks amazing. I've weathered one or two wagons like this before on Newton Grove. One very heavily, one not so heavily. And the results really do speak for themselves. It's an amazing, amazing product. You know, you can't beat real rust. You just put a nice liberal coat on there and whatever doesn't stick will just fall off. If you've done the tops, obviously do the top as well. Just go over everywhere where you put your binding agent. So you now have a wagon that looks like this, which doesn't look like all that much, does it? It just looks like a whole bunch of powder on top of your wagon. But this now is where the magic happens, because what you do is we get our developer and we pour it over with the pipette and we watch the magic happen. All I'm doing now is I'm just mixing in the developer just gently with this brush, just to put it all over where we've put our powder, and you will see how as it dries it starts to transform itself. And like I said, this is where the absolute magic happens. Right, well, I've now gone over all of the wagon with the developer liquid. So now I just need to wait until it dries, because not only does it need to dry itself, but it has to have that chemical reaction with the powder. So that's it for today, and I'll be back with you, well, in a second, but for me, tomorrow. Well, this has been drying for the past 2 days. As I've said, I've used this stuff before. See, I was expecting amazing results, like a real wonderful multicolored rusted effect. And if anything, what I've got here is 50 shades of grey minus about 48 shades. In fact, to paraphrase it, I would call it 50 shades of disappointing. Let's see if I've done this wrong. Apply rust binder to areas to be rusted and allowed to dry. We did that. Apply the powder with a brush or the pipette. Yep, we did that. When dry, apply the developer, which we did, and then allow rust to develop. So that's what the side instructions of the Scenic Rust tell me to do. That's exactly what I've done, as you've seen in this video, and that is the result. Now, if we have a look at what it looks like in natural light, I've shot some of that stuff before, you'll see here, it looks okay. You can definitely see that the weathering powders have combined really, really well. In fact, that'll sort of show you what I was doing the other day with just combining those 2 or 3 colors to make it nice and subtle. You can really see how it now looks wonderful on the wheels, the frame, the brake rigging and so forth. But the rust, I was expecting a lot more from this. So thinking I had done something wrong, I went on to Google and I went on to the official YouTube channel of Deluxe Materials to work out how to apply the Scenic Rust. And on their YouTube channel, they suggested to get the binder and the powder, combine them into this little cup, which of course they supplied, which we didn't use the other day, mix it together with this, and then when you have a paste, paint that onto your wagon and allow it to dry. Well, Deluxe Materials, that's not what it says on the box, is it? But for the sake of this video, we will do what you suggest on here and see if it works, because I don't want anyone watching this thinking, well, why can't I get the same results as you? So we'll follow it to the T, but if for any reason it doesn't work out the way I know it can, and the results aren't pleasing at all, then all I would suggest is Deluxe Materials, change the instructions on your box. Okay, so once again, I will take some of the binder and we will just paint it on to the model. And what we'll do is, rather than going over parts we haven't gone over before, we'll just add the binder to areas where there is already the so-called rust developing. This time what I'll do is I'll take it into the crevices over here and we'll just sort of see what we can get. The good thing with rust, of course, or the thing with rust, is it always forms in corners and on top of ledges and then lips and hinges and so forth, first and foremost, because that's where water can obviously stay. It oxidizes and rust develops. So we're just going to put it into those areas just for now, make it heavier down the bottom than you do at the top, and we'll just see what we can come up with. So this time, as you can see, I'm putting on a little bit more sparingly. The secret to this is, just like doing any other form of weathering, take your time and do it bit by bit by bit. I'll also go over just a few of these patches that I've done before, just to make a few different heavy rust patched areas as such. Try to randomize the patterns as well, so really sort of make it look like rust would look. You know, rust doesn't form in nice long streaks. Well, it can, but it doesn't form in, you know, even strips as such. So try to make it look very uneven when you're applying everything. Down the bottom here at the door, where the door obviously will get a lot of rust, I'm going to put a lot of the binding agent down here and a little bit more into these corners as well. Really getting into those corners there, because I will definitely want to see a lot of rust around here. So let's put a little bit more up the top corners over here. Okay, so now that I've put the binding agent on top of the rust we've already done, we'll dry this, put the powder back on and repeat the process and see how it looks. Okay, now that that's dry, we can now put more of our powder on top and start to build the layers up. And as you'll see in a second, putting the binding agent back on has actually created a few more dark patches, which is starting to make it look better. So we will grab our powder and our pipette and we'll just put some on and see what happens. We'll put a little bit of this stuff all over. We can always shake it off later and just mold that into where we had our binding agent before. And of course, all of this stuff won't hang around for that much longer. Once I tip this wagon up, it'll all disappear. Putting it over where I believe I put everything, so just give it a gentle tap into place, mold it around with the brush. A lot of this is going to fall off again, of course, when you actually pick the wagon up. So by putting it on in this particular way, at least you're guaranteed of the dust going over where the binding agent is. So now that we've put our powder on top of where all the new binding agent is, whatever hasn't been attached to the glue has now fallen off. You can give the wagon a bit of a gentle tap just to make sure that there's nothing loose that's going to be stuck there. And now we can get our developer back out, put it over the powder, and hopefully this time we'll see more magic happen. So after we have put our developer on, once again get the brush out and just dab it onto where the new powders are. You don't want this to go everywhere. After all, we have only put patches on. So just dab it into the corners over here. We did the hinges, under the door, of course we did the sides, and we didn't do the entire wagon. I would assume that if we put a bit of this developer onto the other existing patches that we had from the other day, that they could potentially get darker. I guess we'll test that theory out. So let me just go along, you know, over the top here. Once again, like I said, anywhere where the rust would naturally form. So now that I have put the developer and the powder onto this side of the wagon, we'll wait for that to dry, and then we'll compare the new layer to the other side of the wagon, because so far I've only just done this side. So it'll be very interesting to see how the rust evolves this time, the second time round. So Deluxe Materials, I hope that you're not wrong with your instructions. Okay, several hours have now gone past and not much has changed. I mean, look, I've got a good texture on top of the wagon surface, but as you can see even from this wide shot, it's not really full of rust. This is still 50 shades of grey, in my opinion. What I did do, as a bit of an experiment, is I did combine the binder with the powder into this highly inadequate little cup, which has got a small recess at the bottom. I mean, they don't even provide a decent cup, unfortunately. I mixed that together and I did put it on the sides, and they have turned out better. But I must admit, I'm disappointed this time in Scenic Rust, which surprises me because when I've used it in the past on my other wagons, it's turned out spectacular. I've been so impressed with the results. But I think the mistake I've made this time from the first second I started doing this was reading these damn instructions. So if you want to buy Scenic Rust from Deluxe Materials, do not read the instructions on the box. Instead, go to their YouTube channel and watch their tutorial on how to do it. And they will show you that you combine the binder with the powder into a paste. You then put that on your model. You then put the developer on there and you let it dry for about 8 or 10 hours so the rust forms. That's what's meant to happen. But unfortunately, that's not what's happened here. So what I'm going to do is, I'm not defeated by this. I'm just going to use the texture as a base. Whatever develops later just develops. And I'm now going to go ahead and put some weathering powders with different shades of rust and so forth over this to get that achieved look, because in all honesty, if you put too much of this stuff on, after a while it's going to get thicker and thicker and thicker, and it's going to look absolutely hideous. Ideally what you want is a nice thin-ish or slightly thick layer of rust that shows up with the paint underneath it. If you put too much on, it's going to lose all realism. So I'm not going to bother doing that, because once you put it on, it's hard. It's probably going to be very hard to take off. So using my powders again, we're going to make it look as real as possible. So to achieve the look over here on my reference photograph, and as you can see, I haven't gone for an exact look. I've tried to obviously make it look heavy around the door, but I've also gone a little bit overboard in some ways. But I'm going to be using these 3 powders. So I've got light rust, medium rust, and iron oxide. So I will use those sparingly around here to bring out my colors and textures. And you can see over here you've got lighter shades over in the corners near the door, darker shades around here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with my darker shades and then build up on the lighter shades after that. And hopefully the texture that's being created here will bring out that nice three-dimensional look with these powders. As before with the underframe, I'll put it on slowly and sparingly and build it up gradually. That is the key. So let's see how this turns out. And you can see there how the blending of those colors has slowly made it look that little bit more real. It's not one color, it's got some tone, it's got some texture, and that's looking fairly good. You can see here just by doing that middle section there how I blended those three colors together, and what it does is, whilst it's not overly subtle on the door, and I want it to be a bit more heavy on the door as well, that gets used quite a lot obviously, being open and closed all the time on the prototype. That now looks very three-dimensional and a lot more realistic. Finally, what I'll do after I do all the weathering with these three powders, I'll tone it down ever so slightly with a little bit of soot, just to dull those colors of the rust down. But you can see there, just by blending those three colors just subtly in here and there, it makes all the difference. So let's do the rest of the side and then we'll tone it down a little bit. And there we go, that is the side of the wagon now weathered. I've toned it down using the smoke powder. I might tone it down a little bit further again. It just depends on how it looks in the light. Under these lights, it looks like this, but in daylight, it will look completely different. So over the next day or two, I might either leave it the way it is or tone it down a fraction more. So we're almost done now with this job. One thing I'm gonna do, the last bit of detail, is to weather the inside, because of course, these wagons did get rather filthy. Now, I will be putting a load of coal in this wagon in a later video, so it doesn't really matter about the base so much, but I do want to make sure that the sides look a bit rusty and a bit soot stained. So I'm going to add that detail, and then that will complete the weathering on this wagon. Right, well, that concludes the weathering and detailing, I guess, of this Dapol 16-ton mineral wagon. It wasn't as easy and straightforward as I would have wanted it to be, especially since I have used the Scenic Rust in the past. I've had amazing results and never had a problem. But it's been good to take you on this journey with me to sort of basically show to you, don't read the instructions that they give on the side of their box. Look at their official YouTube channel, or even just look at what I've done here and learn how to do it by making a paste first. Otherwise, you could become frustrated just like I have. But I hope that by showing you how I've combined the weathering powders, the different shades on the underframe, the inside and out on the side as well, using the different color textures of rust and iron ore and so forth, I do hope that I've shown you that weathering actually isn't all that hard if you do it bit by bit, being subtle, and then tone it down as you need to. So my advice, if you haven't done any weathering before, go there, buy yourself a cheap wagon, a second-hand wagon, and just practice. Use the scenic materials, use the weathering powders. If you make a mistake, don't worry, because it's a cheap wagon. If you're using something a bit more like this, well, still don't be too cautious about it. Just little and often, slow and steady, take your time is the key. Anyway, I'm going to go off and have a cup of tea now, so do me a favour, like this video if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, hit that bell, and leave me a comment below. Let me know what you think of the Deluxe Materials brand of the Scenic Rust or any other techniques that you have used. I'd love to hear your technique about weathering, your results, and also what you want to see more of on this channel. So leave me a comment. I'm off for a cup of tea, and I'll see you next time on Newton Grove.